and welcome to episode 2, season 3 of the Galen Hour. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Tonight, we are going to be joined by two distinguished gentlemen. I'm Joe Awe and Hector Silva for our second show in a series of what we're dubbing an eagle eye on the history of the West and Belize district. So Galen Hour is a production of Galen University. Galen University is the premier institution for higher education in Belize. I am Diana Gomez Perifit. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. We'll take a quick break and we'll come back with our guests.
I chose Galen because of its strong reputation.
Great scholarships.
I came because I can take all my classes online.
It is what I need to take me where I want to go.
To learn more about our various programs, visit our website at www.galen.edu.bz or email us at admissions@galen.edu.bz.
And come soar with the Galen Eagles.
Welcome back to the Galen Hour. I'm joined again tonight with Hector Silva, who is a renowned historian in our country. And we're always pleased to have him here. Welcome back, Hector.
Thank you very much.
We also have with us tonight Joe Awe, who is a social science lecturer and a lover of life. Joe is also teaches history and knows a lot about what we're talking about tonight. He's going to be my co-host once again for this episode of the Galen Hour. Tonight we want to talk about Belmopan and events related to our Belmopan becoming our capital. So I want to bring Joe in at this point to help us with this discussion. Joe?
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be back. We have to take advantage of the opportunity that we have Don Hector with us. He has tons of knowledge and information, so we need to take some from him. Thank you for coming in, Don Hector.
Thank you, Joe.
The last episode we discussed a little bit about 1949, and you and I know that if we discuss 1949, you need 5 shows of 2 hours each, right? So we could be weeks doing this thing. But I want to remind our viewers that something happened on December 31st, 1949, and that led to Belizeans getting involved politically more seriously and on towards 1964 self-government. Can you tell us a little bit between 1949 to 1964? And of course, we're directing it towards what would have become the new capital, Belmopan. So, Don Hector, give us a little bit of a scenario between 49 and 64 on toward the new seat of government that is Belmopan.
Good. 1949 is a very crucial year in the history of Belize. Our dollar at that time, because of the chicle and mahogany industries that we spoke about at our last session, Belize had a reserve, a gold reserve, bullions in Martinique and Fort Knox. In other words, our dollar was pegged, or rather was valued by gold reserve. Many people know what I'm talking about. But in 1949, the British borrowed our gold reserve to pay war debts. Second World War debts. And they gave us instead a pound sterling guarantee for our dollar. On the 31st of December, at midnight, 1949, Governor Ronald Garvey declared our dollar devalued. It was no longer a Belize dollar for a US dollar, but it was 140 Belize for 1 US dollar. That's the famous devaluation of 1949 midnight. Okay? Good. Immediately after midnight, 5 young men surrounded by older heads met at Mr. George Price's house to discuss this catastrophe. That's how they term it, catastrophe. So the 5 men were George Price, 31 years old, Lee Richardson, 30, John Smith, 30, Philip Golson, 29, and Nick Pollard, 27 years old. These 5 young men gathered around a round table, and the subject was devaluation, what it would happen to the economy of especially the working Belizeans. At that time, a Belizean used to earn something like about $5 a week. That was more or less the salaries. So that $5 was reduced to about $3 and something. It caused a havoc on the people. So these young men decided we are going to fight it. They agreed to form a committee, People's Committee, to begin this protest. On the 6th of January, and I'm bringing it as brief as possible. On the 6th of January, these young men launched the famous attack against devaluation. 6th of January at the battlefield right in front of Brody's. I was a 17-year young man going to St. John's College. I went there to see what is, well, many of us went. So from there on, it was agreed that the only way they can fight with some substance would be to form a political party, which was formed on the 29th of September, 1950. It was called the Movement of Independence under the umbrella of the People's United Party. In other words, the People's Committee was dissolved that night, and the People's United Party took over as a body, as an entity, to begin this fight against, well, so many things. Against devaluation, against West Indian Federation, against poverty, against everything. So more or less, that's what occurred in 1950. Let us put it straight that the British colonial, not the British, but the colonial office was very much against, so much so that they blocked the formation of that movement, which was to take place at Battlefield in front of the Supreme Court. They denied permit, but the young people formed a big hall that old folks in Belize know about called Thistle Hall, right across the Queen Street Police Station, Katakana, then Caribbean, Valencia have some big buildings. That's where was a big, huge building. And that's where the movement of independence was born. And I leave you at that for this, because on another occasion we can elaborate.
Thank you, Don Hector. That was very important. I am thinking our listeners and viewers will absolutely learn something from there. Like we said, that's a topic that we can discuss for 2 weeks.
That's true.
But we're moving forward, and so this political party came into the game of independence, which is a very serious game. And we learned that in history, Belize became self-governed in 1964.
Yes.
But we also know that 1961, there was a horrific hurricane that struck us. And at the heart of government was the city where it sat. There was a time to search for a new seat, so to speak, for our government. Can you tell us how that came about? Was it the hurricane?
Belize had had many hurricanes in its history. Horrible hurricanes. But it came to that point in 1960 when the Belize City Council could no further administer the expansion of Belize City into those swamps. I'm using word that they used at that time. It was very costly to reclaim land. So what government or the city council decided they passed a motion in the city council asking central government to try to locate a new site to establish the seat of government. In other words, so that people will begin to move to that new site. Public officers, policemen, and so on. So that was the request. Immediately, the government decided to open suggestions for a site where to build this new capital, or rather this seat of government. Many suggestions came, amongst them Borel Boom. Diane, where your parents are?
Yes, yes.
Borel Boom was one. Mullins River was another one. That was suggested by the mayor himself. At that time was Fred Westby. Mayor Fred Westby was the chairman, or rather the city father, the mayor. And then others began. Mountain Pine Ridge was another one. Agustin. And Mile 33, where the zoo is, was another site. I will reveal. Me as the mayor of San Ignacio, I suggested Roaring Creek. It's all written. What I'm telling you is in writing. You can find it in the archives. The July 1st, 1960, I threw a little bit there for Roaring Creek. I gave my reasons. Very center and water, wrong and what, nevertheless. So the ball began rolling. 1961, we were elected. We won the 18 seats in the country. So now we have an absolute majority to begin to push this program. Early 61. By October, the ending, there came a powerful hurricane that made havoc. Flattened Belize City, flattened Dangriga, flattened Mullins River, so much so that Mullins River was practically wiped out. So now they began to find out, so they began to excavate right where the zoo is, but they found below the ground a bank of shiny clay. Shiny clay is a white clay that never gets solid. When it wets, it turns into muck. But when it dries, it turns into dust. So that Mile 33 was abandoned. Then they began to search Mountain Pine Ridge. But Mountain Pine Ridge would have been a bit too difficult for the northern districts. For the southern district to have to come through, drive to practically the western border, then take that road that today is the Caracol Road to go to that new site. So there we came, Belmopan. Belmopan was actually made up of two estates. One was the Melado Estate, Little Orange Rock, known as Little Orange Rock, Melado Estate, and you had the Savannah Estate, belonged to another absentee landlord. That about the hovering board that passes down near Belmopan. On your right was Savannah Bank, on the left was Little Orange Rock. So the big government began. I was fortunate that I was then asked to go and see what was inside that bush. I got hold of Mr. Holz, Melvin Holz, the father of the present Holz that is very sick right now. And he guided us through an old mahogany along with our engineers. Bob Mala, Francis Hector, my secretary, Boise Smith. We entered into an old chalk pass and we ended on a hill, which is the house of representative right now. And we looked around and the engineers reported back, and the surveyors, Joe Langso was there, they reported back to the different ministries about this piece of land that was there. Negotiations began, and the Melado people donated something like about 2,000 acres. And then the other portion was bought from the old Savannah Bank people. And so Belmopan was selected. That's between 1961 and 1964. Hurricane Hattie don't destroy what we had. So actually Hurricane Hattie pushed the idea of a new capital. By some intervention, divine or malignant intervention, Hurricane came to say, yes, we better move up. So it is a mysterious thing to even think about how Belmopan came. An idea pushed by a hurricane to accelerate it. And then the plans began and they were sent to the British government for assistance. 1963, the British agreed to finance Belmopan. So they sent a minister named Greenwich. So Anthony Greenwich came here and they built a stela. I don't know if you all have seen it there, just by where the Hector Silva Street is. They built a stela and he came and he dedicated that stela to the new capital site. No name yet. There was no name. It was new site. Everybody was new site. Mm-hmm. And so a company was engaged from England named the Pauling Construction Company, Pauling, Pauling, Pauling Construction, to build the site. But we, the government of Belize, had to do certain things like opening the area, cleaning out that jungle, putting some, not streets, but walkways to enter. So my ministry, Public Works, which I was the minister then, we opened that area and began to put electricity, water, well, the whole works there. And we built the first 78 houses. Right where Bullfrog is, that area, those 78 houses was built by government, the Belize government. The British financed the rest, which is, then it was put open to name it. And two persons won the prize. Mr. Charles Woods, may read that Silvana Daddy, and Inspector Johnson, or police inspector. They won and they each got a prize. I don't remember if it was a house or a piece of land or something. But so that's where Belmopan came into being. Now, if you have more questions, you can go at this moment.
Yes, so Don Hector, so before all this construction of this capital city, who were people living there, or were people living there? That's one part, and then
no, it was a jungle. It was a full jungle. The only place that was developed was on the left-hand side, where the Melado Estate, Little Orange Rock. That was the only side. But they own all that jungle there. The same thing with Savannah Bank, old Chicle areas and mahogany where they used to take out. Horse used to take out mahogany from that same area where Belmopan is.
Okay. So the rivers, at this time, I'm sure the highway was already there. The rivers were still playing a role for Belmopan.
Yes, that was one of the virtues of Belmopan, that it was practically surrounded by two highways. From the east to west, the Western Highway, now the George Price Highway. And from Roaring Creek down south was the Hummingbird Highway. So that land in Belmopan was actually within an angle, no? So that gave it. Then the rivers, we have the Belize River on one side. We have the Roaring Creek that goes up to the 1,000-foot fall. And then you had the other river named about 5 miles away. Another river that is there. And so Belmopan practical. And then, of course, you have the Mount Pleasant Creek. So when you think about Belmopan from way above, you might be looking at an island surrounded by water. Mount Pleasant, down south, where behind where Jazz Press Center was built, the Mount Pleasant runs. Then farther down is the other river named, I forget the name of the river. And then you have Roaring Creek on one side, and you have the Belize River on the other. So it's water was one of the appealing points, for Belmopan. And of course the land and the above 400 feet above sea level and all that,
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's great. Really. Another question on here. We moved. Who are the first people to sit in office in Belmopan when it first became the seat of government, and then move us to 1973 when the name of the country was changed from British Honduras. Then also, I think it's the same year that the United Democratic Party was formed. Who are the first people to sit in office in Belmopan?
Yes. The first year when Belmopan was declared a city, the first people that went up there were the employees of government. Our houses were already built by the Pauling Company, and the public officers that were to form the machinery of government there went up. Then we followed. The members of the House of Representatives and nominated senators, a few of them, 3, 4. We went down and we held the first meeting in 1970. The first meeting of the National Assembly was held in 1970 in Belmopan. So that's a historic thing, that the first act of government was to hold a meeting. Then, of course, cabinet was organized and everything. So those are the first. Along with those were also some businessmen. I can remember Mr. Beto Espat. They've had a store, a commissary. You had people like Mr. Hyde had a meat shop. You had a lot of the churches began to move in, and so there was an exodus from Belize to Belmopan. In other words, they say we are going to higher ground. Of course, there was some little hitches about transport. How we transport every day from the city where we live. Well, that's a matter that was ironed out afterwards. But so the first residents there were the workers and the public officers.
So this conversation is very interesting. Don Hector, I like that you said there was an exodus, because I never quite thought that an exodus took place from anywhere to Belmopan. But I hear you. I always thought that Belmopan struggled to get people. I mean, now it's a nice bubbling city with a good population, but I think I was of the impression that it struggled. But we do
Jobs was part of that exodus, whereby workers from Belmopan said, let's go. He said they have unlimited amount of jobs in Belmopan. In fact, there were almost about 2,000 people working there. 2,000 something within government employees, workers, and electricity, water supply. Everything was going on in Belmopan. So that's what I said. People went in search of jobs.
Yes.
Yeah, it became a bit tedious because then the transportation was another problem. In those days, there were hardly any buses. Very, very few buses there.
We've come a long way as a country.
Yes.
I'd like to take a short break at this point. This conversation is going really well. We have lots more good information to share. I'm Don Hector and Joe, but we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with the Galen Hour.
The Galen Eagle podcast every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Catch us live on Galen University's Facebook page, YouTube channel, and select radio stations.
Welcome back to the Galen Hour. We're now in our second segment of the show. Joining us tonight is Joe Awe and Don Hector. We're having a very informative conversation about Belmopan, or capital city. We found out some very important information. Well, all of it is important, but for me, the fact that Hattie Hurricane was not necessarily the reason why our capital was moved, but it accelerated the move. So that's good to know. Don Hector, thank you so much for that bit of information. All right, so I want to invite Joe to pick up where we left off and continue the conversation and discussion on Belmopan City and how it became our capital.
Very good. Thank you, Deanna. Don Hector, I just want to take you back a little bit further before we delve into other topics here. In 1964, we became self-governed, meaning that Belizeans, for the first time, were managing a huge portion of the mechanics that was producing this country that will be Belize in 81. The question I want to ask you is, I understand that the British were controlling the military and foreign affairs, but the Belizeans, or us Belizeans, were controlling the rest. Were the British inside those meetings while the Belizeans were organizing and building the country?
Joe, another very good question there that people have to know exactly. First, may I just draw back a little bit and say why that site was named Belmopan? Belmopan. Why? There were amounts of names that were submitted to a committee for the name of this new capital. Names among Belinda, Mayalinda, and a bunch. But the name Belmopan was forwarded, as I told you, by two people there, Carl Woods and Inspector Johnson. And the reason was that we wanted to maintain that word Belize. Even though it was not yet named Belize, but we wanted to maintain the word Belize. And the Mopan, which was old history and new history, to be combined and called the city Belmopan. Mopan was one of the biggest Maya people that inhabited that whole area, the Mopan Maya, from Roaring Creek right up to the western border and around, while the Yucatec, they were up north, and then the Itzapeten and the Quechidong. So Mopan was a combination of Belize and the Mopan people that inhabited that area. And we have Sunantunis, we have Caracol, we have name it. So that is a clarification that I want to make. It was not a creation of Mr. Price. The site was a creation by Mr. Price when he wrote that famous poem of the pillars in the mountain tops. There's a beautiful poem that he wrote. So Mr. Price had a vision about this capital city. That was his baby. And then the matter of the name OK Cover. There's another thing very important. You mentioned about self-government. People do not know that in 1963, Mr. Price, as the first minister, it was at three stages: first minister, premier, and prime minister. First Minister led a delegation to London to discuss a new constitution for Belize. Remember, in 61, we won all the seats. 63, and including the opposition and some other political parties that exist, the small ones. They went to England and they sat down with the colonial office to discuss what will be the next step for Belize. It was suggested self-government. That word did not exist much in the Commonwealth, self-government. It was from most of the other colonies that came from colony into independence. But Mr. Price said, no, I want an interim period to prepare the people. Mr. Lennox Boyd, I think was the colonial secretary, said, why don't you go to independence now? We will give you a guarantee for a period for your security. Mr. Price said no. And the delegation, of course. We want a breathing spell whereby we can begin to prepare our leaders, our government, and and the people, of course. So it was agreed upon that self-government would be the next step, and the word First Minister was to be replaced with Premier. Not Prime Minister, Premier. So it was so done, so agreed. On the 6th of January, Mr. Price called in his cabinet, first cabinet ever in the history of Belize, and 7 of us were summoned to form that cabinet, which was Mr. Price, his deputy, Mr. Albert Catus, Minister Alexander Sandy Hunter, Minister Carl Lindbergh Rogers, Mr. David McCoy, Madame Lizaraga, and yours truly, the youngest of the crowd. So we formed that first cabinet. Now, what power did we have? We had full power for all internal matters of Belize, which included the administration of the government, the running of our resources. The British only remained with defense, public officers, and defense, public officers, and foreign affairs. Those three remained in the hands of the governor. But we were practically fully internally independent. Nobody from the colonial office sat at our meetings. Our cabinet meetings were held purely under the chairmanship of the premier, which was George Price. Prior to this, it was the governor in council that controlled cabinet. Governor in council, and he had a reserve power. He was absolute, the governor. Then we got all those prerogatives under the new self-governed cabinet, self-governed country. And I must point at this point, a little point that people would like to know. When Miss Nora Parham was sentenced to death, tragic, we were not self-governed. We could not do anything. So Mr. Price summoned a caucus meeting, and we sent a petition to the governor then, I think it was Peter Staller, asking for a prerogative of mercy for Nora Parham. And I want this to be brought to every corner of Belize. We thought that Nora Parham should not be hung. But the governor told us that according to British protocol, a policeman represented practically the royalty. In their cap, they had the crown of England, the policemen. They don't have it anymore. So that was the reason why he denied prerogative of mercy that Nora did not have. But as I said, this is just something that people should know. So I have heard comments on say, "Oh, why will nobody?" No, no. The governor was still the powerful man in 1963. In 64, then, self-government came, and so we took over the reins of government. And then we were able to begin to borrow money, to put electricity, to put water, to put telephone. We didn't have any of those things in the whole country of Belize. There was no electricity. In Cayo, we had lanterns. In Facalitons, had kerosene lanterns on the streets. And there was no water supplies, and there was practically no telephone. We had an old magneto type that Don Jorge Hour, your uncle, used to whine to try to get Roaring Creek. And sometimes they can't get Roaring Creek because it drizzle. So you go in the evening and they try it again. They get Roaring Creek, and Roaring Creek put Borel Boom. Mr. Sebastian. Mr. Sebastian go and they connect it to Belize City, to the line behind City Council today, the old City Council house. So those are the things that self-government had to tackle. And of course, land. The people that were landless. No village had their own lands. So these are matters that came, with. I'm trying to illustrate the value of self-government. So that's where we stand. Now you can follow with your other question.
Okay, that's very interesting. Belmopan, have we deviated, looking at it presently, have we deviated from what Belmopan really was designed for? Meaning, have we deviated in any particular way, politically, socially, structurally? Have we deviated today from what
Yes.
Belmopan is?
Topographically bad. Belmopan was never intended to be built where the little villages, I think Salvapan, and I'm not too familiar because there are a lot of little ones. That area is called the Mount Pleasant Flats. It's a water catchment.
Oh, wow.
I don't know who got that idea to extend Belmopan to the east. In fact, by the way, if you check, no cemetery is built to the east of a city. Belmopan cemetery is to the east. All cemeteries that I know are built mostly to the west. San Ignacio own is here to the west of us. Belize City, the cemetery is to the west of Belize City. Orange Rock was to the west of Orange Rock, going towards your creek. And your Corozal own is built way up to the north, going towards Consejo. Only Belmopan built a cemetery to the east. These are only little tidbits that people must know. So the deviation that you asked for was actually derailed. And I have had the plans, for Belmopan. I have a black book here with me, with all the how Belmopan was to be built. Because I was a director of Recondev. The first group of directors was Mr. Price, Perdomo, Sandy Hunter, myself, and the surveyors, and Mr. Halco, and all that. So our original plan for Belmopan was that Belmopan was going to be built, the seat of government where it is. Then the building was going to move more towards the west and towards the south, and of course the east here by Roaring Creek, by that area there where the showgrounds and that whole area. But I noticed that they pushed Belmopan to the east so that every time there's heavy rain there, it floods. People have to come out because those water catchments start to build up floods. So I'm just pointing that out. I'm not criticizing nobody particular, but I'm just saying that big mistakes were made in the expansion of Belmopan.
Very good.
Okay, thank you. Interestingly, Hector, it's obvious that someone decided that Belmopan would have grown structurally to accommodate villages around it. I think that had to do with towards moving into the 1981 independence, where uh, we were asked by the United Nations to allow refugees to come into our land. And something happened, and they decided that Belmopan would have been, and around Belmopan would have been the best place. Maybe it's the quality of the land, we don't know. But nonetheless, in your estimation, where what should Belmopan be like today, or what would it have been like today if we had stayed with the original plans for what Belmopan really represents for us?
Belmopan actually was built as a, first of all, as the seat of government, the new capital. And we were not the first. Brazil built a new capital to Brasilia. So we were not actually bursting that bubble. But Belmopan was a product of necessity because the storms that used to hit so frequent on our old capital. And so Belmopan was I call it a land of refuge, a land of shelter, a land of freedom, from fresh air from everywhere. So this is one of the things that I have been watching also, that the original plan of Belmopan, by the sale of large tracts of land within the city, there have been a lot of controversies. Not too long ago, when lands were sold, streets, avenues were parceled into lots. And that's a travesty. Travesty what has been occurring in Belmopan, whereby greens that are left there as breeders of fresh air were sold to people. That's another what. No, let's go back. You mentioned a word there about refugees. Make I tell you the truth. From 1950, there was a plan to resettle 300 in Belize and 600,000 in Guyana, the famous West Indian Federation. The British didn't want any more exodus of West Indians into London, into England. So they were looking at those colonies that had ample land, like Belize and Guyana, to spread the surplus population from the little islands. Belize was so named, and there was a lot of movement by the British, by the colonial office, to carry that project. But the POP stood very strong in 1950 to object to it. He said, immigration, provided you build the economy first. Build our economy first, then we will think about immigration. That was the first part of that plan to bring in people to settle in Belize. Later on, in the early 60s, the British also came with another plan to bring in people from Lithuania, Europe. And they sent a man, Mr. Jack Downing, to present the plan to us, what was going to be that refugee, they call it refugee, but it is a resettlement of people. But we sat down and we disagreed. We told Mr. Jack Downing, no, we cannot. Belize has to develop first. We need highways. There were no roads. Highways, we need electricity, we need water. Then came another one around mid-1960, just after self-government, to bring in immigrants from Malta. Malta is a big island in the Mediterranean. So they said to bring in immigrants. They were always with the idea to bring in people. Again, we told them, what do we want the Maltese for? They are mostly shipping people, they are more people in a different type of economy than ours. So those three failed. In 1980, just before independence, the United Nations made that proposal because of the wars in Central America that were ravaging. They made a request that an amount of people be brought in as refugees under a United Nations program. Hence, Valley of Peace and other areas that the United Nations was sponsoring. So that's where that immigration thing came. But on many occasions, this matter has come up. I was no longer in government. I had retired. I had taken my sabbatical until I came back as a senator afterward. But the whole thing is that there has always been that I call it temptation to move people to areas like Belize, Guyana, because they don't want that exodus of Central Americans to go to the United States and other areas. Right now, these mass caravans that we are seeing heading up north, they could possibly end in Belize. I don't know what is the recent program. I am still trying to find out what is this amnesty that I hear about. I don't get a true picture yet of it, but as I said, I am very concerned as an old activist of the past that we have to be very careful how much more people we can accommodate in Belize. Belize has a lot, especially with this recent pandemic, this crisis in our economy, that Belize has to be careful how much people we can. Remember, when people come, they bring children. So the schools can be overcrowded. Our clinics, hospitals can be overcrowded. The whole system can be in a position that Belize cannot stand. We don't have a big economy. Our economy is very, very small right now. The United States can take 1 million, but we can't take much.
I can jump in there. I know when we talk in economics and particularly when we talk tourism, we talk about carrying capacity. I think that is true for our sites or reef, for all of our sites. I think what you just said speaks to that, the carrying capacity of our nation. I mean, it may very well be at its limit. And I hear you. We need to be concerned about just how much more we can take on. On that note, though, I'd like to take our last break for tonight. And when we come back, we'll do our wrap up for this episode of the Galen Hour. We'll be right back.
The COVID-19 vaccination helps us to protect the most vulnerable.
Our choice to get vaccinated affects others.
It is a moral responsibility and an act of love for the entire community.
My name is Dorian Barrow. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Education at Galen University.
My name is Melanie Usher Donaldchek. I am the Administrative Assistant to the Office of the Provost at Galen University.
My name is Sherry Gibbs. I'm the Dean for the Faculty of Art, Science and Technology at Galen University.
My name is Dr. Eve Aird and I am the Provost of Galen University.
I got vaccinated because of my family, my colleagues, and my students.
Because I trust the science, but because I also want to protect myself, my family, my colleagues, students, and the community so that we can get out of this pandemic and get back to our lives.
I did it for my Galen family, my family at home, and I did it for you, please.
I got vaccinated for my husband, for my children, for my grandsons, I got vaccinated for Galen University, for my colleagues, for my students. I got vaccinated for Belize, for you.
Get vaxxed.
Wear your mask.
Wash your hands.
And watch your distance.
Welcome back to the Galen Hour. We're in our final segment of this episode, and we want to invite Hector once again to wrap up for us. This has been a very interesting show. We've heard a lot about Belmopan and its beginnings and how it reached where it is today. I mean, it was some debunking of some myths, some things that we thought were true that we were not quite so true. But really, it is good to see that our capital city was planned, and it's one of our it's one of our cities that we know planning went into, and there's so much history to it beyond it being the capital city. So, Hector, I welcome you back, and Joe, to wrap up this episode of the Galen Hour.
Belize has a beautiful story to tell. Belize is not yet known by the vast majority of people. Galen has done a great decision, has taken a great decision to begin this segment, to bring Belize to the people. Belize, the story of Belize, I do not use it as history, but our story. And that's what Galen is doing, bringing forth our story, our living story, the story that we can attest, not by a foreign eye, but by our own. I'm glad to have Joe here, Diane, and there was another young lady, Ashley, and the cameraman that is doing a tremendous job.
Please.
We have a lot to tell Belizeans. We are only scraping the pudding. What we have done in this last two segments is just a little tip of what the Belize story is all about. We can go, for example, one of these days and tell the people what is that wealth untold. The wealth untold that is before us, but we can't see it. We have gold. Somebody else is taking it. We have big oil down the international stone. The authorities do not tell you. Huge amount of oil deposit. And the Guatemalans know it. I saw that reserve in a secret map that was brought from Holland to Mr. Price. And I saw that amount of oil that is there that goes between the Sarsoon and Temash into the Amatike Bay. There is a lot of also things, there are a lot of resources. We have our forests, our medicine in the jungle. We have so much. We have nice people within us. We have good people. Let us not condemn Belize for a few bad eggs. We have working people. You go to all the villages up from north to south. People are producing cacao. They are producing cardamom down south. They are producing oranges, bananas, sugar, and many other things. But the people don't know because travel in Belize has been very restricted. I would have liked that one day, perhaps, people would be invited to come and visit the outside Belize, the districts. So much to see. So much sinkholes. So much waterfalls. So much caves. You know that we have the most caves in the whole of the American continent? I just confirmed it day before yesterday. We have more caves in the whole American continent, even more than the United States. The only one that beat us is Russia. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing. They have the atolls. so much. So I believe that in the near future, in continuing this program, Joe and Diane, you all can begin to find out what are those things that people need to know. I have done a 40-year research because I was hungry to know my country. And behind me here, there are about 20 odd books written already on various of the chicle industry, the mahogany industry, name it. That I hope through this venue, I'll be able to shed a few of my research. I thank you all very much, and I hope that this program will continue and get even more interesting when we go further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hector. You've been sharing quite a bit of valuable information, and I agree with you. There is a history of our country that is not being told. It's not the history that we're seeing in the history books. There's more to us and our people, and what we have started doing here through the Galen Hour indeed is the beginning of us telling that story. And we are honored that you agreed to join us on the Galen Hour. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with our country and using Galen Hour to do so. Joe, your final words?
Yes, thanks again, Don Hector. I am very happy that you could join us. We're always going to be very excited for your presentations because they come from, especially in this particular topic that we have, or these particular topics that we have covered. You were there, so that comes direct from the source. So this is not a secondary source. Galen University, I am grateful to be here. I have a front seat to learning, so that is exactly what Galen is about. So that makes me a very lucky and happy, I like to say, young man. Thank you, Diane and James and Ashley. And Don Hector, once again, thank you.
Thank you both for joining us tonight. Galen University continues to promote academic excellence, sustainable development, and lifelong learning. It is a pleasure to be here with you on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock. We're streamed live on the Galen Facebook page and Love's Facebook page, and we air on Love TV. Thank you, good night, and see you next time, same place, same time, for another episode of the Galen Hour.
On the lovely hill